the Ukrainian SBU intelligence agency, with the help of the MI6 and also support from CIA and possibly some other European intelligence agencies, has carried out a spectacular strike with their drones deep inside Russia, as far away as Vladivostok and Irkutsk, 2,600 miles and more from the Russian border, right? And this was an extremely meticulously planned operation that was, took about 18 months to plan and execute. To some extent, it is being compared with the Israeli pager attacks on the Hezbollah, which also had been, gestated over a long period of time. But this particular attack was used to target the Russian strategic bomber fleet of the Tu-22 and the Tu-95 bombers of the Cold War era. These bombers are no longer under production, but they were the mainstay of the initial Russian triad of nuclear delivery means. That means strategic bombers, then the intercontinental ballistic missiles, intermediate range ballistic missiles, and then the nuclear submarine based triad. So what the Ukrainians have tried to hit with the support of Western intelligence agencies is a part of the Russian nuclear triad. Now please understand, this is a dangerously destabilizing and a most reckless and ill thought crazy plan, which could easily create, set up the conditions for a major escalation in the conflict in Europe, right? The simple fact is, it may have been a brilliant tactical success because of the ingenuity displayed, the cleverness shown, and the fact is, it could well turn out to be a strategic disaster still. So let's first try and understand what really has happened. The Ukrainian SBU, with the help of the British MI6 agencies, intelligence agencies, they plan to inject, their cargo carrier trucks into the Russian economy, so that it would just blend in with the cargo carriers, the container carriers that were operating around. 4 of these were then modified to have a wooden compartment on the roof where the UAVs were housed. A total number of 117 UAVs, it was said initially. Later figures are indicating 174 quadcopters, which they claim were locally assembled within Russia itself and not even smuggled from here, because that may have been difficult to do a trans-border shipment of so many drones. But these were locally assembled. These trucks were then driven along with the convoys. They passed through all barriers, all checkposts, etc. and they reached thousands of miles inside Russia, near almost Irkutsk and Vladivostok. Then these trucks were parked outside 4 main Russian air bases, which were Alenia, Inovo, also Olinia and Otenia. These were the 4 Russian air bases, thousands of miles inside Russia, well away from the Ukrainian border. And then they also tried to target one naval base where it is presumed that the Russian nuclear submarines were parked. The entire intention was to hit at Russia's strategic nuclear retaliation capabilities. These are quite obviously worrying Europe. So quite obviously no Russian missiles have ever been fired on Ukraine. So it was quite obvious that it was not just Ukraine alone which carried out this very, very daring attack, but the entire Western agencies were involved in planning and executing this meticulous operation over a period of 18 months of gestation. Now we were all surprised as to how come the Russian bombers were parked out in the open, no hangars, no concrete aprons, no bins. They were parked in the open like arrayed for a parade inspection. How did that happen? How did the Russians allow this to happen? And then we learnt with a shock that as per the terms of the strategic START, Strategic Arms Limitation Treaty, both the Russians and the Americans were supposed to not hide their nuclear capable bombers but park them out in the open so that the satellites of the other side could pick them up and they would have fair early warning of any movement or any plans to launch attacks using these strategic bombers. How utterly immoral it is to try and take advantage of an arms limitation treaty by which Russia is supposed to keep its bombers exposed and utilize that to hit it and cause such severe damage. Now, personally, I thought that this is too much of a provocation for the Russians to allow to let pass. And this provocation was timed exactly to, coincide with the Russia-Ukraine peace talks being carried out in Istanbul. It is well known that Donald Trump was getting highly emotive and irritated over his failure to get the two sides to come to a ceasefire, to come to a meaningful negotiations, and he was getting very frustrated and threatening that he would walk out of these talks. And he was in fact losing his shirt on Vladimir Putin. He was saying that he's gone mad. So this attack was very well timed to now ignite Putin, to now trigger off Putin, put him in a towering rage with such a dangerous strike on his nuclear triad, on his nuclear delivery capacities. And could this be a precursor to any preemptive attacks on Russia, even nuclear strikes? You can't put it past some people in Europe who have gone stark raving mad. I mean, it is the height of irrationality to take such attacks and such risks in terms of targeting, which were bound to provoke escalation. But it is to the credit of Vladimir Putin, even at the risk of looking weak. His initial reactions, of course, was he said Mother Russia is under attack. But thereafter, he's tried to read the game plan of the Europeans and of the Ukrainians. The plan was to somehow trigger Putin so much that he would go into a major escalation, call off the peace talks, and thereby, irritate Donald Trump to a level that America would get drawn into the conflict back with Russia. So that is what the Europeans want. They are very clear. On their own, they just cannot hope to take on Russia. But they want to provoke Russia into doing something irrational that will allow them to go whimpering and crying to the United States and tell Donald Trump to get involved in the conflict. Why does Donald Trump not want to get involved in the conflict? Because he has a grand strategic design. He wants to get a period of peace and quiet for the military economic consolidation of the United States, for him to be able to take on the deep state which has carried out this attack under his very nose, which has given the clearance for this attack and helped in this very dangerous provocation, extremely dangerous, most irrational and illogical provocation, which could have catastrophic consequences, not just for Europe, but for the rest of the world, because they could have triggered off a nuclear conflict. But Russia tried to read the intentions and came to the conclusion that the aim was to trigger Putin into getting emotive and calling off peace talks and launching major punitive strikes. Russia may still launch these punitive strikes, but very, very strangely and very, I would say, soberly, they have not called off the peace talks. They have exchanged to give back 6,000 body remains of the Ukrainian officers and soldiers which are lying with them, and prisoner exchange swaps are going on. He has not called off the peace talks, but that will not prevent Putin from exacting revenge. And that is why Ukraine is now cowering, Europe is now cowering. Zelenskyy was taken away and hidden away in some hideout to possibly escape an instant Russian retaliation. How is the Russian retaliation likely to come? They've already started mass scale, Geran drone attacks onto Kyiv and Kharkiv and some other cities. These will only escalate in the days ahead. They will also get down to missile strikes. But above all, they are now likely to go in for Oreshnik missile strikes. These could be command and control decapacitating strikes against Zelenskyy himself, against the Ukrainian command authority themselves. But they could even go beyond the borders of Ukraine. Frankly, I for one would not be surprised if Putin decided to target air base in Ukraine. Sorry, not only in Ukraine, but in the United Kingdom, to pay them back for the kind of attack they have done on his nuclear capable aircraft, a part of his strategic triad, and they are going boasting that they have destroyed about 30% of one leg of the Russian triad, which is the Strategic Bomber Command. Like I said, this is extremely dangerous. It could have very destabilizing consequences in terms of horizontal and vertical escalation, and even accidental escalation which had not been planned for. The United Kingdom, France, Germany are now looking worried sick that the war could escalate and come into their areas. Stramer, who has been a great hawk, posturing as a great hawk who wants to fight Russia to the last Ukrainian, has been asking for American aircraft which are nuclear capable so that he could shore up his own deterrence. This, like I said, has been a dangerously destabilizing move. Some are linking it to Pearl Harbor. Don't forget, Pearl Harbor was a great tactical success to start with, a smashing tactical success, but it led to the utter defeat and capitulation of Japan, and finally it ended up with 2 nuclear weapons on the Japanese cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. We hope this current round of the most irrational escalation on the part of Ukraine and Europe will not have such equally tragic consequences.